Good day and welcome to another Global Performance Excellence webinar offered by the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers. As I've mentioned in previous sessions, I think we're up to 130 sessions we've done in the last 4 years. I'm joined today by Jared Frederici, a colleague of mine. He works with the Poirier Group and he's a master black belt, and he's a senior leader in the Poirier Group, and you'll hear more about him. I've included his LinkedIn page there. If you'd like to get to know him better, just feel free to click on that when you receive a copy of the presentation, and you'll be able to hook up with Jared. So today the focus is on operational analytics, quote 501. We've been using that rubric, so to speak, 101, 201, 301, 401, 501. And today we're really going to focus, zoom in on, I would call it tools, apps, power apps, how to become a better analyst. But Jared's going to give you a nice, quick overview of the tools that are available to us for different stages of the work involved in business process management, more specifically operational analytics. I will say at the outset that I'm going to do some tee up, and I'm going to cover off some of the things that we went over in 101, 201, 301, and 401. We're going to, this 501, we're going to zip through things. We're going to give you sort of a high level brush of the tools, apps, some of the things you need to think about as you continue to work to develop your analytic skills. And then we're actually going to create a 601 webinar that will be a follow-on to this, where we'll spend a little more time, Jared will spend a little more time diving into some of the specific tools and apps that are useful at different stages of evolution of not only your knowledge and skill sets with analytics, but your organization's capabilities and competencies with this. As we've said in previous webinars, these are being recorded. You'll get an email tomorrow that'll provide a link that will get you to where those recordings and presentation are stored. During the webinar, if you'll use the chat function, I monitor that, and I would be glad to introduce your comments and or questions as we go along in the presentation. And for those of you that like those certificates of participation, IIS will be sending those out 3 to 5 days type of time frame. And I want to once again thank our sponsor and partner for investing time and energy and money, people's time, the Poirier Group, for supporting this operational analytics mini-series. We've been doing mini-series since the fall of 2022. We had strategies for riding the rays of disruption. We knew that 2023 was going to be a challenging year. So we did that mini-series, and then we did a supply chain management 4.0, 5.0 mini-series. This is we're finishing up the operational analytics mini-series, and we're going to launch next week the AI mini-series. So we've been doing a number of 3-4 webinar sets, so to speak, that give you a cluster of information. Each of these mini-series has culminated in an article that's been published in the IISE magazine. The one back in fall of 2022 is on the left, the supply chain mini-series in the middle there, and most recently, just this month, the operational analytics article that Jared and I wrote, which capstones these webinars that we've been doing in a way. You go to the IISE website, the link is here. Once again, once you get a copy of this presentation, you'll be able to click on that link. It will take you right to the operational analytics. Alex is actually posting that for you in the chat box, so you can see those links. You can copy them if you'd like. So as I said, we've done a whole bunch of webinars, and so this is the organizational and process excellence list of webinars. They're all timely, they're current, and they're on demand. All you got to do is go into the IISE website, click on them, and you'll be able to peruse these and pick the ones that you like best. Same thing is true for the operational analytics. So you can see there the 101, 201, 301, and 401. If you go to the Poirier Group websites, and I provide, and Alex will be providing the links to the Poirier Group. you'll find shorter versions of these webinars. So we've condensed them down to 12 minutes, 14 minutes. We've also got them in a LinkedIn format down there at the bottom if you want to go to the TPG LinkedIn channel. I'm sorry, I said LinkedIn, I meant YouTube channel, sorry. So I'm going to start off, and this is going to be sort of a recap of what we covered off in 101 through 401, and then I'm going to pass the baton very quickly to Jared. So the things that we've talked about in 101 through 401 is, as an analyst, as an organizational or operational analytics specialist, one of the first things you have to do is you have to be able to really understand the organizational or value stream that you're focused on. So you have to be able to answer the question, how does it work? So that's process mapping, right? Draw pictures of how it works. How does it need to perform? What are the performance requirements? How is it currently performing? What are the gaps between the way it needs to perform and the way it does perform? What's causing the gaps? What do we do about the gaps? So when you think about those questions, that really is sort of the fundamental DMAIC methodology that many of you are familiar with in Lean Sigma. Define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And then the second piece, we got to be able to, we have to know how to build data models. And Jared's going to talk about that a little bit this morning, and perform the data management role, what we call the data management role. You have to define what are your data requirements? What's the source of the data? If you don't have the data, how do you create the data? Assembling and organizing the data for analytics, a big requirement, so to speak, for a good operational or analytics person. And then transfer from Excel, and I just put Excel in quotes, to your analytics app. And I just said, e.g. Minicab Power BI, but Jared's going to give you other examples of other apps that can be used for analytics. And then I think, Jared, you've got to conceive of, you've got to do concept design for the, okay, now that I've got this data, how do I convert it into information that provokes timely decisions and actions that result in benefits realization, that results in the outcomes that the organization needs, the customers need? And that's really the essence of the analyst role. And ultimately, I think an analyst is a change master. They have to be able to create systems that provoke the right kinds of decisions in the right time frame, and produce results that make a difference to the organization and to our customers. So Jared, those are the things that are sort of the essence of what I think we've been wanting to get at in this OA mini series. In 401, we were exposed to University Health Network's, I would call it their management system for analytics. And I'm not going to go into this in detail. You can go and you can look at the 401 webinar and you can get into this, but I just show it because I think it's a really well thought through infrastructure for analytics, to support analytics. And then they stressed the interactions between components. So they talked about, there's interaction between certain components with respect to prioritization and investment of advanced analytics or AI projects. There's people, culture, and data literacy issues that have to be addressed. There's technology and business opportunities that have to be addressed. So I think that model, those models that they introduced us to, that are the framework for how analytics has been playing out at University Health Network in Toronto. And a number of the attendees of that 401 webinar said, boy, this will work in any organization. This isn't just a healthcare organization, this will work anywhere. And I totally agree with that observation that was made. Then the other thing I liked about, they talked about the core roles that they've got in the analytics function. So they've got the decision support analyst, and they talked about what's the role, what's the skills, what's the value proposition, the analytics consultant. And then I really like this one, the data storyteller. I think that this is really the essence of the apex of that analytics triangle we've been talking about in 101 through 401. And so this picture, we showed this picture in a number of our sessions. This is really what Jared's going to be talking about today, is he's going to be talking about tools and methods that can be used to get data, sort data, arrange data, present data visually. And then I think, Jared, the mechanism, once we get to explain with a story, now we start getting to the art of analytics. Maybe, I don't know, maybe AI is going to get really good at telling stuff with a story. Maybe it will, and you could talk about that too. But so anyhow, I like this slide because I think it sort of represents, and Jared again today is going to talk about mechanisms and tools and apps that help you do this. The management systems model was introduced in 101, and it's that's the framework that we use to help us understand the analytics, the operational analytics process in the context of PDSA. Think about it as plan, do, study, adjust. And then we talked about the analytics triangle. This was in 201. We talked about the bottom half and the top half, and then I went through slide by slide. I'm not going to cover this because we talked about it in that session in 201. We talked about the data management role. We talked about the feature extraction layer. We talked about the knowledge extraction layer, and we talked about the visualization layer. And then we of course talked about the above the line role and the below the line role. Jared, I think today you're going to focus a little bit on both of those roles.
Yeah, that's right, Scott. Because I think that operational analytics plays certainly in both, and requires different tools in both above the line and below the line. I think in the absence of one or the other, you start to see cracks in different areas downstream or upstream. Yep. You're right.
Yep. So I'm going to pass the baton to you now, Jared. That's just a real quick run through of what we covered off in 101 through 401. And I think it sets the stage for you to talk to us about, okay, as an analyst, what tools, power apps can we use to help us get our job done?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I really appreciate being here. Excited to be here. We put together some things that I'll go quickly through. We're going to go backwards a little bit to go forwards in the context of BPM. And talk about some of the fresher tools, what that looks like nowadays, since we've done some of those webinars, and what some of the newer tools or newer apps are in the context of teeing up operational analytics. So I'll go pretty quickly through that, and then talk about some tools and maybe a professional development guide for how to tactically improve some of this, as IEs got to have skills in both of these areas in BPM and operational analytics, upstream and downstream. So we'll kind of quickly go through that. Anything you wanted to cover, Scott, before we just hop right in?
No. Well, Jared, what I did here, I know I threw you a curveball here. All I did was take your slides, Jared, and I just sort of created a storyline. So I think you don't really have to go through this. I did this more for the audience. I think basically this is the storyline to the slides that Jared's going to work through with you. Does that sort of make sense when you look at this at first glance, Jared?
It does, and I think while the audience has a chance to read this, what I'd say is, because you're going to see a lot of triangles today.
Yeah.
Top of the Intel triangle is a really, really nice way of showing the attributes or pieces or building blocks of operational analytics. And as Scott had mentioned, we've done previous webinars, there are roles that you play below the line, or data or foundational or integration, and then above the line, which is the data storyteller or BI or visualization role. We'll see a few around triangles that represent the maturity of organizations, of how well they do BPM and operational analytics, and you'll see how they tie together. But when I think of BPM and operational analytics, I think of them as concentric circles. And the overlap being that as a result of deploying a mature BPM competency, tools, techniques, you ought to be re-engineering processes, and those processes have process data, process characteristics that require analytics. We do confirmatory data analysis to prove that a process has improved in a sense. Now, some of these tools do process mining automatically and do that, but when you improve a process, you're typically measuring the improvement of said process, and that's where the OA role. So if you imagine the overlap or the concentric circle between OA and BPM, that's part of the context of this webinar, and then some more detailed tools and techniques to improve your skills at it. So we'll hop right in. And again, triangle here. So this is really around sort of the BPMM framework of maturity. When you look at business process management 4.0, and you've seen this before, one is really process is art, controlled chaos. 2 is people have things written down, but maybe a semblance of current state. So 3 is really around re-engineering those, a mechanism by which we can actually re-engineer those, and we've got a sense of future state. 4 is there's a fairly mature competency. We fix processes, they break down, we fix them again, and that happens as a cycle.
So Jared, quick question. So the row 4, that implicitly means you got measurement. You're using measures to manage, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's right. There's some table stakes OA that has to occur to get to level 4, in other words.
Yeah.
5 is really around creating digital twins of process, doing some process mining, having some predictive nature to process so that we can predict failures. And 6, which is really BPM 5.0, is where AI dependent programs are automatically predicting process breakdowns and putting mitigation frameworks in place based on a set of business rules that humans have made, but may also challenge the business rules in and of themselves. And that happens autonomously based on, again, those constraints. So pretty, and that's happening right now, especially in high transaction related environments. So we just wanted to show that. And what we do then is, what are some of the tools and apps available? And this is not an exhaustive list of BPM, but if you typically are in the Excel PowerPoint access, number 1, process flow charts in Excel or Word or what have you. But then you start to see in 2 and 3, both digital whiteboards, the notion of some web-based process, classic Visio, other platforms available, Lucidchart and others that have, sort of Visio in a web environment with different functions and hyperlinks and the ability of web integrations and APIs. Typically in 4, you're doing more EDA, exploratory data analysis, CDA, but in the context of a proper engine to do analytics. And you'll see some of the tier 1, tier 2 web-based ERPs there. In 5, you're really getting to mining, ML, auto ML in terms of UiPath and some of these other pieces. But nonetheless, in 6, you just see that's where really OpenAI, ChatGPT, we've got some other tools in there. Solanas does process mining and AI. Again, just to expose you to some of the fresher tools now that exist to help us and equip us to, use these and take your organizational maturity up levels. As IEs, we are called upon to improve the organizational maturity at various stages wherever we lie. My recommendation just from seeing these in industry is to have some exposure and do a deep dive in some of these tools. Like I said, obviously Visio, I think ChatGPT and OpenAI's platforms 3.5 and 4 now are quite good and are quite interesting. One digital whiteboard, Mural and Miro compete. There's a few others, but you can just get a sense of what I think that as IEs, in terms of what a lot of organizations have application-wise, you want to choose deep dives on tools that cross that big nature. I think but also choose them in the context of what your organization's using as well. The yellow here is really just a recommendation on having some knowledge of, maybe not a deep dive, but knowing enough to be dangerous or knowing when you need to potentially use this. So in the context of BPM here, or your organization typically is in the 2 to 3 range, and these tools and techniques can help you elevate that upwards.
So Jared, a quick question from the audience. So QI macros level 4?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the organization, but typically in a level 4. Yeah. Okay. I would agree with that, Tim. Yeah. I think I don't want to spend too much time because you can go through some of the previous webinars, but again, the reason you do these is to leverage some of these tools to move maturity levels up. So in this case, going from 1 to 3, some enterprise Visio mapping with embedded races and swim lanes, going down to level 4 and integrated SOPs and maybe a few data cubes. And we'll talk a little bit later about that to organize and structure some of the data, are just some tools and tactics, again, to move from 1 to 3. And again, I won't go through too much of this because we've covered this in others, but we're going to do a similar view in operational analytics. But I want to show, again, the construct of BPM first. Similarly, within, if you're in a level 3 and you want to move to sort of 5, and you want to start to create some process mining, digital twins, automation workflows, you can see some visuals here of some of those workflows and what some of the tools are to get you there so that your processes are digitized, that there's process characteristics and data associated with them, and they're mined, sometimes autonomously, to predict process breakdowns on your behalf.
So Jared,
and right now,
quick question for you. So a lot of people on the webinar are from SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises. But then we've also got some GMs and some John Deeres and some Flexes. 4 to 5 is probably a stretch for an SME.
Potentially, because of the Microsoft Power Platform now and how it's embedded into D365, you're getting some of those tools for free or on the cheap that you have exposure to, whether it's a purchase order process. I think you can get the level 5 for SMEs for select value chains where there's a little bit more data rich environments, whereas used to be sort of don't even consider it, but now you can get there.
So less of a stretch for SMEs because of the Power Apps and the Microsoft platform. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the price point of these tools, especially even tier 1 RPA and ML tools, are coming down. The cost of cloud data is coming down a bit, so they're more accessible now, I would say, for sure. Yeah. So I want to move into the operational analytics piece here, but this just gives you some, what does level 5 look like in action in the context of isolating processes that are great potentials for automation or for removal, and how different workflows can automatically take those out or streamline them. I did want to show, what does 6 look like? And these are some things that our team's working on around starting to leverage AI. And I think one of the things the team's beta testing is doing a process workshop with the team and recording that workshop. And you're talking process data. We're talking process characteristics. Step 1 is this, step 2 is this. This is a parallel, this is a predecessor. We've started to use Teams and some digital whiteboards and record those process workshops. You can use OpenAI's speech-to-text conversion, which is Whisper. There's a number of those available where you can create a transcript automatically based on that recording of that workshop and ingest it into GPT 3.5. There's some Excel add-ins that can convert basically your transcript of that meeting into tabular data process characteristics. Then what you can do is actually import that into a Visio. Visio has import characteristics files that you can import to automatically create a process map as a result of those process characteristics. There's certain nomenclatures to use. And so basically what I'm saying is you can have a workshop around processes and have a swim lane diagram come out in a matter of seconds based on that transcript. Now, so our team's been working really hard to pull that off and make it seamless. But I think that's how AI is being used in some cases. Imagine having a workshop or a Kaizen event and talking with your team, and a process map is ready to go to tweak instead of having to start from scratch on that. So anyways, I think those are some examples of how AI is being deployed in those areas. And in enterprise levels, I think, it's already happening. Process mining, automated in the context of AI is already happening right now. I think in terms of developmental milestones, as Scott had gone back, getting to be able to document current state, overlay sort of RACI or structure in swim lanes, root causes, do heat maps in the context of your BPM and process structure, build future state, create a mechanism, level 4 for ongoing BPM, do PDSA in the context of that to fix and re-engineer processes, starting to mine or create process data around those different flows, a lot of times level 4, creating and exposing those as a digital twin, in the web or in some variant so that you can expose RPA or machine learning in the context of some of those select business processes. Do process mining, and then basically begin to leverage AI to do predictive processing and autonomous process fixes or detection of failures. I think this is kind of those developmental milestones as you start to look at your career path and where you can start to integrate. I think YouTube and other LinkedIn Learning and other mechanisms are great just to go dive into some of these things versus taking courses. I mean, you can, but anyways, I wanted to show a quick roadmap before we dive into operational analytics in the context of BPM. So what we'll do is, again, going back to the triangle here, operational analytics, we typically see organizations at typically the level 4, but I wanted to go back through the same, where are most organizations at in the context of operational analytics or industrial engineers, where we typically play. It tends to be a little bit higher, but number one, sort of paper files doing handwritten analysis, maybe some basic spreadsheets. It's very reactive, it's ad hoc. Number two, we've got some structure, we're reactive, we're doing some basic exploratory data analysis. We've got some spreadsheets, maybe some linked databases, certainly minimal to no root cause. 3 here would be, you've got a moderate structure, maybe some linked tables, you're a bit reactive, you might be doing some confirmatory data analysis and some root cause, but it's fairly disparate. Say there's predictive at level 4, EDA and CDA, they happen in parallel. You might be creating leading indicators and time series data to forecast where things are at this point. Most organizations, I think, at IEs are playing at the level 4 level. And then as you move into operational analytics 4.0, this is where we start to see, the ability to manipulate large portions of data, work with data warehouses in real time, ensure high integrity of data. You might have a data science practice, some RPA or machine learning is occurring in parallel of said data, and some predictive analytics and process mining is happening. I think at the level 5 level, that's what we tend to see. And then at the 6th level here, can we do portions of BI and data science in the context of AI and do it autonomously, making automatic interventions based on those rules, as we had mentioned. Humans are spending maybe 90% on decision support versus doing the analytics. So the lead time of getting to the right answer, in a sense, is cut down significantly. And we focus a lot on the implementation of those changes. So I think this is just a parallel sense of maturity of operational analytics. And again, we see most in the 4 range. And I think, so the sense of this is, how do we start to bump you up? What are some tools and apps to bump you up in some of these maturities? Again, another triangle, but in the context of this, what are some operational analytics platforms, some apps and tools that tend to associate with these various levels? Now, note that this is imperfect, and some of these tools cross across these levels, but you can see, from Excel with macros to access databases to your classic Minitab or Engine Room or R or other platforms. You can see some tools associated with these that we can dive into again at a later date, and kind of a recommended deep dive of where I think, based on, again, the Poirier Group, we get to see hundreds of organizations and a lot of different industry verticals. So we see a lot of ERP systems, we see a lot of things. So, you want to choose some platforms to get good at that are, one, match your organization's needs, but also, you don't want to choose too niche of a tool where it's only maybe applicable to one part of one organization. So I think that's where, if you're going to go deep on something, I think personally, get good with Excel macros, learn a little bit of Access, learn the Power Platform in the context of Microsoft, but get dangerous with Python and start to learn, GPT 3.5, 4.0, look at Copilot and some of those things that are happening now. But also, I think having some knowledge of these other platforms that are out there is quite, Tableau is doing great things, MicroStrategy, Tier 1 BI platform, Domo, and others. So anyways, wanted to show some tools and apps on here. My opinion, recommendation on what some things are, and you can go to any YouTube channel and just kind of dive in and learn and do some cases and learn a bit about these platforms. So I think going back to connect these two to the operational and the Intel triangle, again, you can also take those apps and rearrange them, and they fit nicely into these different buckets as well. So when you learn one, you might be learning them at different phases of maturity in the organization or your development, but they also play in different areas of the Intel triangle. So that's why I think that's set there again, and again, these play between different areas, but I think it's also interesting to see how these play across the Intel triangle. And I think that as an IE, you've got to be able to sort of seamlessly come in and out of these with knowing different tools to be dangerous in them, and then zoom out and then go to other areas. Because again, on the BPM side, you might have really rich process data here, and you might be in the knowledge extraction level, but at this process, you might not even have data and you're in the data gathering or selection phase. So that's how you go back and forth.
So I wanted to jump in here, Jared, and share my perspective and experiences, and a couple of people have commented on in the chats. So I would put Manytab and SPC Excel up in feature extraction, because I see, and having said that, it's an analytic tool, and I put Power BI reports. In other words, that Power BI, to me, when I think about Power BI, I think about a pivot table on steroids, sort of. And so feature extraction, and what I see in a lot of organizations, Jared, is that they're stuck at feature extraction, and that the things that University Health Network talked about, the data storyteller, and Intel had the same thing. They talked about the same concept, that people don't know how to go from feature extraction to knowledge extraction. And I see it with the students that take the operational analytics course with IISE. They can't draw the line between what's the difference between feature extraction and knowledge extraction, and then what do you mean by visualization? In other words, what does data storytelling or information storytelling really contain? Behaviorally, that's where I think organizations get stuck. Now, the mechanisms, the tools and the mechanisms that you're highlighting are super critical, because they accelerate the evolution of capabilities and competencies. But again, if you can't get past understanding the difference between what feature extraction looks like and knowledge extraction, then you're sort of stuck, right?
That's right. I think a lot of these tools, people use them to do every element of the triangle, Excel specifically. Whether it's great at that or not is a debate. Some of these tools are really great at one thing and not others, whereas Manytab can be great at about 4 or 5 of these things. So, picking one bucket here is a little challenging, but to your point, a lot of times, mechanically we can get great at feature extraction to find what to find process characteristics, data characteristics, standard deviation, mean, characteristics of the data that pop out, but that don't necessarily create knowledge in the context of what the problem is, or having a real sense of the problem, or what done looks like. So part of this is tool usage. Part of this is also defining what done looks like. The standard deviation of X with a mean of this over this with a sample size of N is this. Being able to pull out features associated with that based on cleansed data is one thing, but being able to say that this process is better than this process. And the reason why that's important is because it's a predecessor to this that's upstream, and you got to fix this, and it's worth $262,000, and you'd be able to move and shift resources around. It's going to create the capacity to do $500,000 more in revenue. So I think some of that, Scott, also is separate from the tool, but in the way that we go to problem solving in the context of our organization too.
Where would you put Mozart and mode, as a question from Jake?
Sorry, in mode. Well, boy, probably. I think it probably goes between integration some feature extraction. I think it's probably a 3 or 4 of these pieces all in parallel. But yeah, good question. So I think, Scott, that's a great question on feature extraction and knowledge extraction. And I think on top of that, you know, getting great visualizations that create those aha moments is, again, you can have great knowledge extraction, but you know, in the absence of doing the visualization, you could lose them. And we see that quite a bit.
Yeah, and Julia made a great point. He said that the concept of visualization, it depends on how you define visualization, but the concept of how you portrayed data, facts, information can be at different levels of the triangle, which is a true statement. So I can do feature extraction, and then the question is, how do I visualize the features that I'm extracting? That's an important art or aspect of analytics, right?
Yeah, 100%. Well, and it also it starts with a rich understanding of your use case. So every organization, even intra-departmentally, are going to have different use cases. How much can they handle? You
Yeah.
know, sometimes, you know,
and then Hong asked the question, do you have your own IT system admin to support the triangle? So Hong, the answer I give you, the short answer would be, go back and look at webinar 401 with University Health Network. Those slides that I showed you, they actually have an analytics function or unit in the organization. And those 3 roles that I showed you, those are, and sometimes it's in IT and sometimes it's not in IT. And, you know, it just depends. Intel had its own analytics unit for global supply chain. And all they did was those 3 roles that University Health Network talked about. And all they really did was manage this triangle.
Yeah, and in some cases it's outsourced. In some cases, parts of this are outsourced, parts of it are insourced. In some cases, some of the data science teams get so strong at portions of this that they take over that competency. So I think it's a blend depending on the organization. Within our organization, we do have, you know, some full-time IT support, but we also have a lot of curious people as well. I think that's also important. Yeah.
So this was good, Jared, and I think this was a good time for us to do a little bit of dialogue back and forth. I think you got a couple more slides here to finish up. Maybe I don't know.
Well, quite actually, you know, in terms of making a dent in your development, because there's a lot of apps out there, and it probably feels it is daunting. You know, is there a critical path? In my opinion, the critical path of rapid development to get some exposure to these, to bump up your skills, because, you know, everybody's starting from a different place. So obviously, you know, step one's getting much better at Excel, and what does better mean? You know, to move into an advanced, you know, role is not too difficult these days. I don't believe that all enterprise applications should be macros in Excel. Those tend not to be the most sustainable, but in the process of learning that and putting on the record button and learning some Power Pivot, basic pivot tables, and using macros to refresh those, it starts to give you some real foundational skill, you know, to the point where it can assist you in learning SQL and maybe OLAP cubes and some other Access database pieces. So I think it's a great starting point. So if you're, you know, beginner intermediate, to move into advanced is a great starting point, because I think frankly we all tend to use Excel. Access is sort of the next layer of evolution here, and helps really on the database management side, so that, you know, do you understand how to choose field types and data types? Do you understand what the difference is between, you know, sort of numeric attachment, calculated fields, short strings, long strings of text? Can you join tables? Can you start to look at data from a tabular perspective and understand whether we need an inner join or an outer join and create those relationships? Can you build a form? You know, Access is really nice, and Forms is a really nice, there's some really cool things you can do. People built little mini ERP systems in Access. I don't know if they should or not, but they have. And can you know, how do you populate new tables of data based on user entry form information? And what if they make a mistake? And, you know, you just get all these rich opportunities to learn on the data side. Can you create, can you do queries? And I would say on the bonus side, if you start to do queries in the query designer in Access. You can also create SQL code to execute those in parallel. And then you start to learn a little bit of SQL in parallel. So I think that's a really nice bonus there. If you get some basic access, you can kill two birds there and start to create some reports. I don't think they're particularly great, but this is where at least you learn enough to be dangerous, and you start to see how some of the other tools here are better and faster. And so again, I don't think you spend 4 years learning this, but maybe a month just getting dangerous at it to bump up and move into the next level. I think in the context of exploratory data analysis, there's a lot of platforms, certainly Minitab we use quite a bit, but consistency, see weakness in sort of one or two in people's ability to ask the question about what distribution fits the data of the phenomenon I'm looking at. We typically tend, and it's unfortunate, to assume normality and go use tools that make that assumption, and we don't check for it. And sometimes we don't know if we have enough, sample size. How big is your sample size? If you're doing hypothesis testing, how many data points do you need to have so I think that we're still seeing people making leaps here without going and checking the distribution and going and checking to make sure power sample is spot on for your application. So they just basic check marks here to make sure we're doing that within your organization. So in Minitab and there's other platforms, there are help features that can automatically move you into the right EDA platform or tool. And can you create some 6-packs or 6-in-1 or 12-in-1 to create a broad spread quickly on EDA versus spending a ton of time one by one, right? That's definitely a maturity area as an analyst. And then the other piece is a lot of these tools within Minitab, we don't sometimes know, or we forget that you can do macros in Minitab. So, you start to mature in this and you're maybe at the level 2 or 3 level, imagine if you could run a script and do all the exploratory data and analytics weekly of your department in 30 seconds. Well, you can. So I think that just ways to sort of mature and improve your tool set here so that you can move into CDA or you can move into predictive analytics and not get caught up on what happened in the past. So within this, I think that this is an example of how you can make some of those transitions just through some of your own skills. I think as we go into confirmatory data analysis, I think table stakes. So what do we have to have as IEs is just, the ability to go in and do some knowledge and feature extraction and understand when to apply the right set of tools to, statistically prove one from the other or show enough evidence and portray that correctly. But I think where we're leaning towards and what we're seeing now is really around the notion of automating exploratory data analysis and confirmatory data analysis, starting to use R. It's a great platform here with some of the add-ins like Auto EDA and Statsomat. So there's some others where not only can you automate some of the EDA portions, but you can automate some of the CDA and hypothesis testing and get some insights automatically. So I think that that's where we're starting to see, and that's why a lot of students are learning R and Python and other platforms, because they start to help us not in isolation do an analysis, but do bulk analysis, throw a bunch at it automatically so that our time isn't spent doing the analysis, it's interpreting the analysis and then creating the right visualization to tell the story. So I think that's the evolution from an OA perspective that we're seeing. When we look at the ability to manipulate large, chunks of data here, or start to move in Excel and start to move from single sheets into multiple sheets and creating data models, I think that there's, understanding what an OLAP cube is and how we can build that or how we can work with it. There's some built-in in Excel 2010 and higher. There's some Excel cube features automatically that you can see these cube functions that are built in. So I think there's some great things you can learn here to deal with multi-dimensional data and build some hypercubes. Again, we can feature and dive deep in another webinar. They also note that some of these platforms, OLAP and cubes are starting to go away a bit and be replaced with some NoSQL platforms and object-oriented platforms. But that's again a debate. But I think even understanding what this is and working more efficiently with multi-dimensional data is huge, because how often do we get stuck in a huge, 300,000 line spreadsheet? So again, some tools to beef up your knowledge as IEs to get more dangerous with these at a faster rate. Same sort of notion here is Python. So I put some top Python libraries. Again, we could debate these, but the ability to use some of these to architect, create data, create arrays based on those, display them, and use some of the visualization and plotting features is really powerful these days. And that's why at the undergrad level, it's starting to continue to take off. So I think it's really flexible, again, open source, and there's now a ton of libraries and better visualization platforms available. So in a sense, I don't want to say the Excel killer, but in a sense, a lot of organizations and IEs within them are using that to cut the lead time down of how long it takes to manipulate and work with data environments like this. Very dangerous platform for IEs, and I mean that in a great way. I think another piece, again, quickly on this is how do we work with APIs, so application programming interfaces, to make data calls using requests against nodes to pull web-based data in, and because how many times are we working with web-based sources? I think there's a really interesting analogy of the waiter, customer chef waiter, in terms of the role of the API that you could kind of look at. But I think we may hear some of these things and, oh, that's for IT to do. But I think that a basic understanding of some of these, you start to realize that these calls, some of these strings of code are really not that complex. And a lot of now with so many of our applications web-based, API understandings is quite critical of how we interact and deal with web data, how we call for it, how we make sure it's done in a secure environment. So I would challenge you to have a basic understanding of some of this and maybe demystify how complex some of this actually is. The Power Platform we're seeing critical. We're seeing a large portion of the organizations we support on a portion of this. And so getting the ability to deploy rapidly Power Apps, use Power Automate to do workflows and automate pieces of that app, create top of triangle visualizations based on Microsoft Azure or other data sources using Power BI. And then, whether it's virtual agents or automation in the context of interacting with chat, and then exposing some of those or creating web pages as a result. I mean, it's a very powerful platform that I think having some exposure to, I'd probably recommend Power BI is a great starting point, but some sense of how to work with data in Azure and maybe some on the Power Automate side is a great place to start. I think for us, how are we pulling in as an organization sort of 2, 3, 4, and 6? So if you go back to sort of the tools as part of maturity level 2, 3, 4, and even AI at the level 6, we're actually building some things around benchmarking. And we talked about this in the previous webinar around us using ChatGPT, IBISWorld as a great tier 1 research and benchmarking platform, CapIQ, some APIs. And eventually when Copilot's fully rolled out, the way you can combine some of these and what that means for us is, can you, in a matter of 30 seconds based on your industry, have a sense of your key operational KPIs and how those are benchmarked to other organizations. So if you knew that on the COGS perspective, you were 10% lower than your competitors, does that have implications for your organization? What if you could do this internally within departments? So I think starting to pull these together to create applications to tell a story around how good are we departmentally or across other enterprises is critical. And this will help us get a sense of where to place some of our bets of improvements within organizations. And then the final piece I'll kind of talk through around level 6 and starting to deploy AI and operational analytics for us is being able, again, going back to do workshops to find out some root causes, doing interviews and get transcripts of those recordings. again, Whisper, creating transcripts of those and automatically codifying those into Excel, but then starting to add in some data sources into GPT in their file uploader from different functional areas. So that what we're able to do is, when we do a diagnostic or an exploratory analysis with an organization, instead of taking 4, 5, 6 weeks to get a pulse of the root cause, imagine if, you can take those interviews, record it, and have ChatGPT do cluster analysis based on root cause automatically. So imagine in 24 hours, if you could get a sense of a departmental issue from a root cause perspective and work with multidimensional arrays and clusters of codified data of root causes. I think that that's the direction that we're starting to see, and it has ramifications and implications for consulting for sure, in terms of spending more time on implementation and change management. Because again, getting to the right answer, getting to the root cause, the lead time of that's going to continue to shrink through the application of some of these tools. And it's getting pretty scary. Again, imagine if you could get to the root cause of some of your issues as an IE 90% faster. That's what the implications are for some of these tools. I think pulling this all together, where does OA, operational analytics, lie? But you can start to see in isolation, it has a lot of dependencies in terms of data analytics and the inputs into some sort of data integration later. Where is it stored? Data warehouse. So when we talk about operational analytics, we're talking about tools here, but remember that it's part of an entire ecosystem. If parts of that are broken, these tools should give you the ability to go in and zoom out to fix some of these other areas, even if it may not be in your area. So I wanted to make sure we showed that, and then I'll kind of finish with this, which is your OA journey in terms of some of these tools and skills. Getting great at an advanced Excel is a great starting point, because it tees up some other pieces. Learning macros, enough to be dangerous and start to position, knowing R a bit, potentially Python, and understanding how to navigate within Minitab or whatever your stats package is to do EDA and CDA, and then getting to the point where perhaps you can bulk experiment with EDA and CDA on a given data set, press a button, run it, and do bulk EDA to cut down that lead time. Experimenting with Python and the great visualizers and data library tools that they've got is another level of maturity. Dealing with data cubes, OLAP, even now NoSQL environments or object-oriented environments are great. Having some basic exposure to working with APIs or creating some basic calls to obtain web data. Understanding SQL, data warehouse or data warehouse management, Amazon Web, so AWS, Azure, and other platforms there. Again, some basic exposure to how those work. The Power Platform or equivalent to go seamlessly between sort of Power BI and working with data in Azure, I think is important, and how to do apps and Power Automate, I think is important to know. BI tools, automated EDA, CDA in some tier 1 BI tools like Tableau or MicroStrategy or others. And then starting to expose or get exposure to some basic AI tools and demystify how complicated those are to work with. A lot of organizations are right now figuring out how to use them. So anyways, I know I threw a lot at you, but I wanted to give you a flavor for some tips, tricks, tools to beef up your level of maturity within operational analytics in the context of BPM. So Scott, what other questions or what other things should we wrap up with?
We're just about, let me cover off a couple other things, and then we'll see if we got time for some other dialogue. So the other thing I wanted to cover off is, some of you are interested in certifications as a way of beefing up your resume, beefing up your LinkedIn. And so IISE has developed a operational analytics certification. There's different approaches you can take. So, MIT, I just use them as an example. MIT Management Executive Education has an applied business analytics course, 4 days to 6 months, $600 to $5,000, online, virtual. So it's a time and cost sort of trade-off. Northwestern, on the other end of the spectrum, has a Master of Science in Analytics that is actually in their Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering. 1 to 2 years, 50 to 100,000 bucks. It's an outstanding program. I spent a couple of days at Northwestern. Absolutely one of the best analytics programs that I've seen. Dalhousie, interestingly, has an industrial engineering department. They're up in New Brunswick? What, Halifax, Jared?
I believe, yeah, Nova Scotia. Yeah,
Nova Scotia. Their undergraduate ISE program is really outstanding. They've woven some really cool analytics courses into that undergraduate program. What we did in IISE was we wanted to create something that was shorter, easier to access, more affordable. And it basically, we have a course that we offer that is roughly equivalent to a 1 semester 4 credit hour class. It's about 12 CEUs, 400, very affordable for students, $400 for students plus $250 for the certification, and then $575 for professional members, $725 if you're not a non-member, and then $550 for the certification. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to James Swisher or myself, James Swisher at IISE or myself, and we can tell you more about that program. So it's divided into modules. It's self-paced, self-managing, but we do have coaching. So I'm on the phone every week, a couple of times a week with students that we've got. We got one student in Morocco, one student in South Africa. We got somebody in California. So we got people all over taking the course right now. So anyhow, so that's something you consider. What's just ahead is we've got, so Jared at the tail end of his presentation, I think did a nice job of segueing us into AI from operational analytics. Next Thursday, we will have a webinar, AI 101. Jared will be part of that. Jonathan Carmona, Mateus Scuda, and Ben Amaba will join Jared in the panel. And we're going to give you an ISE perspective on AI. And then we will, we're in a process of developing the AI 201, 301, and 401, which will be delivered in August and September. Jared and I will be doing AI OA 601. It won't be the 10th of August. It'll be in the near future. We haven't actually locked down a date on that. But I know we went through things very rapidly today. And so what Jared and I want to do in 601 is slow it down a little bit and zoom in on some really critical, I would call it maturity, zoom in more on some of the more critical aspects of what you were talking about today. Maybe like, for example, the line between feature extraction and knowledge extraction from a tool and app perspective and from a practical perspective. And then in September, we have our capstone senior design competition every year that the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineering sponsors. And the 4 finalists this year were Dalhousie, Virginia Tech, Toronto Metro University, and Georgia Tech. And those 4 teams will be presenting on in September. I'll let you know the date as soon as we get that locked down. We also have a best practices in service systems engineering award every year. IISE sponsors with support from Penn State, and GM, Purdue, and the County Community Corrections Office and University of Illinois and Deep Air Solutions are the 3 finalists for that. And on October 19th, we'll have that those 3 presentations for you to take advantage of. And then on the 24th of October, Jim Tompkins is back. Many of you have heard Jim speak before. He's very dynamic, very a great thought leader in our field. And he's going to talk about the evolution of globalization versus deglobalization, but specifically with an eye on what are the implications for industrial and systems engineering practice in in the world in the in the 20s, what's ahead of us. So I think that's going to be interesting, sort of take us up a level and get us thinking about sort of macro context of what we're doing with our lives energy. So look forward to that one. So Jared, thank you. I think it was a great job. We'll slow it down and do a little bit more dialogue in 601. So again, I appreciate it, you taking time to do this, Jared. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, everybody.
See you all soon.